All right. How'd that go? Is that pretty good? Not too bad? Okay, we're going to walk through the solution. Again, for those in the chat, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in. Okay, so let's dive right in. Oh, did I not? Okay, let me do. Okay. And make sure these are committed. Feature add programmatic routes to Pokedex. Great. Git checkout branch 15 solution. Okay, so the way this is going to work is we're going to go inside of our C'est la vie. I keep messing that up actually. cd C'est la vie and then run dev. Looks like we're good. And then inside of Chrome, boom, there we are. We're 74. I just realized because I have 2 running. Great. Okay. So the exercise here was to go into the login and let's start by programmatically navigating it somewhere. So inside of our source, inside of our views, we're going to look at our login page. And all right, we're just basically going to do a quick check to make sure we actually have an email. So again, we're not doing anything too fancy here. We're just going to v-model to something called, let's say, user, or let's say email input. That's what I'll call it. And so I'll import a ref from view because this is something we want to track. And so we'll say const email input equals ref. That is an empty string by default. So to show that this works, though, I'll do 1, 2, 3. You'll notice that it does populate up. So that's fine. We know that it's working. The thing we need to check, though, is that when the user clicks here, and we'll call this login, so const login, we need to actually make sure that email input actually has the thing, right? So log test. Whoops, not test. So we'll log email input dot value. And so to show what I mean by this is we can see here, if I go Ben at Ben, then we can continue with email. You'll see that that is actually being rendered out as expected. OK, great. So now all we need to do is just do a simple check to say if email.input.value, let's say, so this is a string, right? So I think we actually can do that includes an @ symbol. And the email input.value.length is greater than 3. We'll just keep the logic simple here. Then we'll say valid user, else log invalid user. OK, let's see if that works. We have test, nothing's working, nothing is working. Why? Because, well, we didn't click on anything. There you go, that's a valid user. If we just do test, invalid user, because there's no @ symbol. But then we just do @ by itself, also invalid user. OK, easy enough as an email test. Again, just so you know, this is not production grade quality email validation. Just know that this is just for demo purposes. OK, we have our valid user. Oop. We have our valid user. So what do we want to do? We want to navigate it. We want to navigate our users to a page. How do we do that? Well, let's go ahead and import our use router from view router. Then we will go ahead and construct it by calling it our router using use router. And then all we need to do is inside of here, we'll just leave the console log because that's nice to have for now, is do router.push and let's go to user, just like that. And so, whoops, something's not happy. What's going on? Well, I have typos up here at the top. That's what's wrong. So let's save here. Much better. OK, so we do the T, and then we continue with email. Nothing's happening. Great. Test at email.com. Continue with email. Look at that. Programmatic navigation, easy peasy with the composition API in that we imported it, used the router to set it up, and then we just push the user once we had fulfilled our logic for the app. OK, the final thing that we need to do, although let me just go ahead and commit this part real quick for y'all. Git commit feature, add programmatic login to C'est la vie. Great. Is that we need the user to be able to actually look at different things. So when we click on it, they'll actually be able to at least see user 1, user 2. Or in this case, we actually might even just want to show their name. Let's do that. So the way we might do that is we'll go inside of our routes. So I think it's currently we're managing it inside of here. That's totally fine. So we'll basically create a user page. Looks like I didn't name that quite well. So what I'm going to do for now, just to make it a little bit easier, is I'm going to call it user detail page. But you should note that user page is slightly semantically inaccurate. So the H1 here will be our user. So I'll just say username so that's easy to see that we switched pages. And then we have our path to /user /, and then this time we'll call the variable name instead of ID to show you how that works. Component will import what? We'll import /views /user detail page.view. Save. OK, to show that this works, we'll go inside of our user page. And inside of each of these loops, rather than just having the card here, what we're going to do is we're going to actually wrap it here inside of a router link 2. And so the router card will just go inside of our router link. And where we're going to route it to is going to be a JavaScript. We're going to dynamically bind this one because we need to dynamically create it, which is going to be /user/, and then we'll do the basically user.name. This might be a little bit tricky, though, because I know there's spaces in here. OK, so if we refresh this, ooh, did not like that. User. Oh, right, because the loop is in here. So my mistake, we actually cannot do it at this level. At least the way it's currently architected, I would need to actually go inside of user card in order to actually do this. So inside of here is where then we would actually then say, OK, wrap this in a router link. And inside of here is where we can say to ES6 template /user user.name, just like that. There you go. We see our links showing up now. Wonderful. So if we inspect all of these, we'll see that we can see /Leanne Graham. Great. So if we click on it, we should see, oh, we are correctly being navigated to username. So that's good. But we need to actually make sure this shows up in a way that actually takes into account the actual user's name. So how do we do that? Well, we need to get info on the route. So where are we going to reach for? Reaching for use route from view router. And then we'll initialize the route by calling use route. And then we can basically log the route.params and to show you what's happening here. And you'll notice that inside of here, we have a name, because that's what we named it inside of our routes. So now that we have that, great. All we need to do now is just swap it out to go route.params.name. Save. And there we have it. So we go to user again, Irvin, Clementine. It works. Question?
What if you wanted to pass that user object to the profile page and have additional information that is not on that user's list page?
That is a great question. So we won't be able to cover it in depth today, but what I want you to check out for this, so the question here is around the fact that what if you actually want to pass that user information to the route, right? Some sort of props passing, that kind of stuff. I believe it's actually in the program. Oh, passing props to route components, literally this page. So this will allow you to do kind of some interesting stuff regarding how you pass parameters. But what's interesting, too, is that if you turn certain routes as props true, it'll actually drop the parameters and certain things as props to the page. So you don't even need to use route. It'll actually be passed as a prop to the component, which, again, takes a little wrapping your mind around. So it's one of those kind of call it intermediate to advanced techniques that if it's something you're looking for, take a read of this document, see if it fits your scenario. But generally speaking, what we've been doing thus far regarding just grabbing the route.params ID, that fulfills, I would say, a good 70 to 80% of the use cases out there, which is what I wanted to make sure that we covered.
Are you going to get burnt by deep linking to that page?
Deep linking to the page.
You're passing in props, an object to the link.
Yep.
And you deep link to it.
Yep.
Without having visited the page before that.
Yeah.
Does that burn you?
Yep. So that's where the state management can be very tricky. So that's why you have to be careful when you're passing that kind of stuff around, what stuff is already accessible. Because earlier during the exercise, if you all notice, when I loaded the homepage for SailView, the 5 users actually don't show up. So if I refresh this page, you'll notice it's gone. And the reason for that, it's not a bug, actually. It's how it's intended, because user page is what's actually loading the data. And so unless you visit user page, homepage has no idea what these 5 things are. And so as far as the state's concerned, the composable is concerned, it doesn't exist. So knowing where to import, how to make sure they stay in sync, That's part of the puzzle that of the game that we play. Cool. Okay, so let me make sure that's committed for the solution branch. Commit. Add examples for dynamic params and programmatic routing. All right. So we are on to, we're nearing the final end, or final end. We're nearing the end of the day. And so what we're going to take a look at next is the, oh yeah, I'm already checked out on it. I was like, what is going on? Okay. All right, so for the recording, we are here. All right. So we're going to talk about global state management with Pinya. Pinya, if you don't know, I believe is French for pineapple. And basically, it is a successor to Vuex. So if you've heard from the React community about Redux patterns and those kind of thing, Pinya is the evolution of that because Vue did take inspiration from like the Redux pattern, so we had Vuex for a very long time. But there were some ergonomics with it that made it kind of tricky to work with over the long period of time. And so Pinya with the composition API has basically been the evolution of Vuex. OK, so in terms of Pinya, let's take a look at what that looks like. All right, because global state management typically is a fairly complicated topic. So first of all, be sure to pin their docs, pinya.vuejs.org. Once again, this is an officially supported Vue library. And it's got this cute little mascot, which I need to get some stickers of. And basically, Pinya, funny enough, was started out as just like an experiment that Eduardo, also known as Postva, who actually wrote Vue Router, was kind of experimenting with how we might reinvent Vuex. And so he kind of came up with this idea, and it's gained a lot of popularity. And so that is, and thus it is now the official one. OK, so to show it in action, what we're going to go ahead and do is on the playground, I'm going to go ahead and just install it right now. So install npm install Pinya. And so once again, let's go and see how we know that we're using it. We can go ahead and look inside of the package.json. And as we see here, we'll see Vue Router, and we see Pinya now. Now, the only thing we need to do before we need to continue using it, though, is just like the router, we need to tell Vue that we're using this plugin, basically. And so inside of our main.ts, we get the opportunity to now create basically a Pinya instance. How does that work? It's just like Vue Router, actually. So we can import create Pinya from Pinya. And so just to show you that again, this time it'll actually autocomplete. There you go. Now that's right. And so remember that multi-line thing I was telling you about? This is where this is super helpful, because we can say const Pinya equals create Pinya. And then after that, after we use the router, we can just say app.use Pinya. There you go. And just like that, you have Pinya enabled on your app. So how does Pinya actually work, right? Creating stores and stuff, this is stuff, again, is typically very complicated. But I think I've set you all up to kind of see what it's actually like. What we're going to do is we're going to create a folder called stores. Because what are these, after all, what are we trying to track? We're trying to track stores of data. And that's what these, excuse me. OK, let me rewind that for the recording. So what are we creating? We're creating a directory for stores. Why? Because when it comes to global state management, they're typically referred to as stores of the data, of the actions we need to take in order to make changes to those data stores. So let's go ahead and inside of this playground this time, we notice that we have this count store over here. Let's go ahead and recreate this over here. So I'm going to do count store, and I'm just going to do it in Pascal case just to make it look different. And what does that look like now inside of Pinya? Well, let's go ahead and define the store. And so if we look at the docs here, we're going to do things very composition API-like. We're going to import define store from Pinya. And then what we're going to do then is export a const of use whatever the count store or whatever the store name is. So use count store is typically what it's called. So use appended to this. And then we call the define store in here. Now the difference is one, we first start by defining how we want the store to be labeled. So I usually just call it count store, like whatever it's already called inside of the file name. And then after that, you get an object that you get to configure. And inside of here, it's going to look kind of familiar. So one, you get a state option to return data. There is a getters option, and there is an actions option. And so you might think, this looks familiar. This looks a little bit like options. And it does, in the sense that it's providing you structure at how you manage your state. Because what we saw with composition API earlier is that you can kind of wrangle together whatever you want. But this, especially when we think about global stores, it's actually useful to have a convention for everyone to follow. Because you really don't want it to be like the wild, wild west when it comes to people managing and accessing data. And something else that you might notice too, though, missing from here, especially for my fellow Vuex users, there are no mutations. And that is probably one of the best things about Pinia, is that when we have something in here, like count 0, and we want to increment the count, all we got to do is go this.count++, and it takes care of everything for you. No more creating this separate thing that's like a mutation that requires you to call an action, and then the mutation is basically redundant of the thing that you're trying to do. That's all gone. And so we think of this another way to alias it, just to provide that mental model, data, computed, methods. That's what you have. And so if we compare this over now to the count store that we originally sort of scaffolded ourselves together inside of the composables, you'll see you'll see here how different the code is, in the sense that this is just kind of however I feel like and however I chose to write it. But you get an additional benefit, actually, that I'll show you in right here. So let's add that increment amount to 80. And then this one is going to be plus equal this.increment amount, because this should look familiar to our base counter set that we've done before. And then we'll have a double count here. That will be a function that receives the state as an argument. And we just return state.count times 2, just like that. And then I messed something up because I used a comma instead of a period. Boom. OK. How is this any different than what we just did? So we have this right here, and I'm going to leave this to the right so that we have this as a reference. Now, inside of our base counter this time, what I'm going to do is we're going to go ahead and actually import this store. So import use counter store, or use count store, it looks like. There you go. It actually detected it properly. So we are getting some typed auto completion, which is super nice. And this time, we'll do a const new count store, which will be the use count store, like this. Just like that. And then we're going to return new count store, just like that. OK, so what do we get out of this? One, I'm going to show you what it looks like when we actually use it. So let me bring that back over. We're here. This is great. OK. So first thing first is that now that you have your count store, what you actually end up finding out is that when we look at something like third counter version, you'll see that count store actually starts giving you the ability to let's see, count store dot count, just like, ooh, that auto-completed in a bad way. Third counter version here. Return count store. Oh, new count store. My bad. New count store. OK, so let me do this again. So when we look inside of here, you're going to notice that we get auto-completion here. It actually can detect properties on that store now. So you get a lot of auto-completion out of this. So in other words, if we take a look, increment is actually sitting right here. It actually knows that it's a property now. And so there's a lot of work being done underneath to help with the IntelliSense of what's going on when you're managing your code. And so here, we can do count, for example. And then as you can see, it's 0. But actually, very easily, if we added a button, we can just say new count store dot increment, and then new increment. And then you can see it just works. And the reason why I kind of preface this with how global stores are normally complicated, this should actually remind you of the composable we kind of designed ourselves, in the sense that you designed this piece called count. I keep hitting the print. You have this thing called count store. Again, it learns from the options API. It takes the advantage of the option API by providing some structure, gives you the chance to manipulate it as you see fit. But then when you call it, it feels just as natural as using any other part of the data. Whereas in a lot of other state managements that I've used before, there's usually a lot in terms of like going in to like fetch a certain thing, and then auto-completion becomes a bit of a pain. If you use Vuex, you knew that you had to type the string exactly a certain way to initiate a certain action. There was a lot of like opportunities for mistakes. But with this, it's easy for us to understand what's happening. And on top of that, I'm always a big fan of conventions, especially when it comes to debugging. We know that state management is notoriously difficult to do. And so if you take a look right here, you'll notice that another benefit you get by using Pinya is that you get this dev tool right here. And we can actually go ahead and start inspecting it and doing stuff just like you normally would want to do when you're debugging a large application. And the other thing that, again, it feels really natural as we do this right now, is that unlike a global state management store like the way Vuex used to be, you used to have to intentionally namespace modules. In other words, you have to be like, from this global piece, only take this small piece and import it here. Only take this small piece and import it here. But then sometimes you still ended up with like importing everything at once, right? So Vuex stores became rather cumbersome, and people had trouble with that. But with this new model of like a composable about Pinya, this is actually modular by default. You only import the stores you need where you need them. And so almost without even thinking about it, you've solved the performance bottleneck that might have naturally occurred in an enterprise-grade app where you have the singleton tracking global state, everyone just chucking stuff in there because they can, or it's the easiest thing to do. But now it almost is just as easy to go, wait, my functionality is about login. I'm going to create a login store. I'm not going to toss it in the global state. I'm going to actually think of it modular first. And the fact that it's namespace modular first, I think that's wonderful because it encourages us to use best practices without even realizing it. I think that's some of the best sort of advancements that we can have when it comes to developer tooling. So there's actually not much more to cover than that when it comes to Pinya. So what I would like you to do is let me go ahead and first start by committing all this. Uh, 16 solution. OK. Your challenge for Pinya is a combination of these two. So let me go ahead and bring these two together. OK, actually, I'll just do it like this. Oh, this is not correct. Open Pinya docs. So I'm going to do this just for the recording. Pinya. There you go. Now we're good. OK. And then we're at state, getters, and actions. OK. This is your exercise for the next. I'm gonna let you, since it's very similar to composables, I just want to give you. I'll give you all like just, I would say 8 minutes to just install, play around with it a little bit. But it should feel very familiar. So 8 minutes on the clock for you to just go ahead and play around with Pinya and see how that goes.
Yeah, could you explain the exercise a little bit better?
Yeah, of course. I'll start with that. And then everyone else, please feel free to keep working on it. OK, so for this exercise, what I'd like you to do is actually go ahead and get some hands-on experience with Pinya as well. So just like View Router, go ahead and open up the Pinya docs for reference. And then, let me update the slide real quick. OK, then I'll redo that instruction so it's easier from a cutting perspective.
You missed it again.
Did I miss it? Wait, is it autocorrecting? I think it's autocorrecting. Yeah, it's autocorrecting. Gosh, I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm not typing pin. OK, great. Thank you for noticing that. All right, let me redo this. OK. So for this exercise, what I'd like you to do is also get some hands-on experience just like you did with View Router. Go ahead and open up the Pinya docs for reference because, once again, the docs are a great resource for helping to debug and learn more things about the library as you continue using it. Then go ahead and install Pinya onto the C'est La Vue app and configure Vue to use it. Again, it should feel familiar based on what we just did with View Router. Go ahead and then create a stores folder, and then go ahead and just create any kind of data store that you think makes sense for C'est La Vue. Then once you create your first store, try to add some state, getters, or actions. And then finally, go ahead and call those things inside of your components. And with that, I'll leave you be. Although, hang on, y'all need to cut this as gutters. So I'll just full screen this so you
gutters.
can. There you go. Now it says getters. So that's the screen you'll need to lay over the entire time. Cool. All right. How was that? How's working with Pina? Yeah, not too bad. Okay. All right. So as always, if you have questions for those watching online, please feel free to drop that in the chat. Let's go ahead and run through that. So the way we're going to do this is let's go ahead and restart. And this time we're going to go ahead to the C'est la view. And then we're going to install Pina. That's the first thing we're going to do. Once we have that, then I can go ahead and run dev. So we can have that over here, which is great. OK. What is broken? Oh, I'm on the wrong page. That's why. OK, great. OK, that's working now. So once you have Pina installed, what you got to do is you got to configure it. So inside of, I'm in the wrong folder. Inside of C'est la view for main.js, we have here, this is where we're creating the view router. Let's then go ahead and find create Pina app functionality from Pina. And so once again, to verify that, you can always check the autocomplete. I usually do like autocomplete because it just prevents the one-off typing errors that which you've seen me do on this workshop. So once we have that, great. We can then, OK, we have a bunch of router stuff here. Let me just collapse that. And then const Pina equals create Pina. And what are we going to do? App.use Pina. All right, so now that we have that enabled, we can go ahead and create our first store. So what we're going to do here, inside of our components, it looks like, honestly, the user store makes the most sense. So we can go ahead and do user store.js. And so we're going to go ahead and import define Pina from Pina. And then we're going to export our store, which is going to be a const of use user store. And we'll call the define, not define Pina, my mistake, define store. We've already defined Pina at the app level. Now we're defining a specific store. The store gets what? It gets 2 arguments. One, what are we going to call the store? Again, keep it simple. I like to keep it whatever the file name is. So it's user store. And then we get an option of what? We get the state, which is a function that returns an object. We get the getters, and we have the actions. OK, so what we can do, if we take a look at our code, is inside of our views, inside of user page, you can see that we're doing quite a bit here as far as the data goes. Now, we're importing it currently from composables. So let's migrate that over. That's what we're going to do in this particular one. So inside of composables, you'll see that user list is just a ref. Well, if that's the case, all we got to do here is to show you side by side. In our user store, is add a user list, and then just make it an array. And when we save that, now when we go inside of our user page, rather than importing the user list like this, what we're going to do is we're going to import the use user store from, and then this should be from stores/user store, just like that. And so again, let's just double check. I did get the right one. Wait, nope. Export const use user store. That should be the right one. We'll find out just momentarily. OK, so then we will set up the store by what? By calling our function. So const user store equals use user store. And then we'll go ahead and save that. And that looks good. OK, good. Now it's actually being fetched correctly. That's good. So now that we have the user store, we can get rid of this dot value. No longer that. It's just user store dot user list, just like that. So let's see if that actually worked. If we refresh, go to the user page, we'll see something is not working. OK, why? Because guess what? We're looking at user store dot user list, but inside of our template, you'll see that we're only referring to user list directly. So again, one of the things I like about the modular way is that it's very clear about where things are coming from. Now, for those who really care about destructuring, making your code shorter, there are ways to do it. We're not going to cover it right now because I do think using it out of the box like this has its advantages for being declarative and easy to understand. So now that we save this, go ahead and take a look at how that looks. And there we go. Everything is showing up as expected. Now, the other things we can possibly do with this is we want to go ahead and practice getting the getters, right? So we were doing that on the home page right here. So we go in the app page. We had the ability to, oh wait, no, home page is here. We were looking at something called short user list. Well, what we can do instead is actually take this part and we can shorten the code by saying, OK, we're going to take this calculation that we've done and we're going to go to the user store. And inside of our getters, we're going to get a short user list. Short user list. And we can use an arrow function for this, where it'll get the state, and it'll return state.userList, and we don't need the value. And this is the equivalent of our computed property. Now that we have this in here, we can go back over to our home page, which is right here. And we can actually now just remove this in its entirety. And we can then say, instead of import user list, we're actually going to import use user store. There you go. It's auto-completed. Fantastic. Const user store equal use user store. We were calling that. And now that this is available to us, we can then say user store dot short user list. Save. So now we go back to the home. Oh, there we go. User, home. There we go. We have our short list. It's all kept in one place. Now, one last thing before we wrap this up is that we need to actually verify how do we do actions, right? And so there was a great question earlier regarding the fact that if we look at user store, you might be tempted to actually make this part some sort of asynchronous functionality, right? Like I want to fetch this, return it into this value. But when it comes to setting up state and managing that with composables, my recommendation for doing that is to always start with the initial empty state. That's where that should start. And then later on, when you're writing code, you'll have that go ahead and override and populate it. But for now, always try to avoid the async stuff in here. Keep that just to the standard data types. However, what we can do, though, is inside of our actions, this is where we can write that fetch functionality. So where is that currently living right now? My guess is it's on user page. And sure enough, look at this. Async function fetch users. Let's just steal that entire thing away, because it doesn't need to be here. So let's grab that over into our user store and drop that in. Now, this current syntax won't work. Why? Because this is async function when you're defining it outside of an object. So what we need to do is actually make fetch users an async function like this. And then let me try to save it. It'll format itself a little bit better, which is great. And then there we go. And then you can see we get the fetch here. We get this response, and then we get the response. But rather than just return it in this particular case, because in this scenario we're saying that this function is specific to the store, actually, you know what? Take that back. We're going to leave it like this. I'll show you the two ways on why. So now we have the fetch users here. How are we going to use it? Well, inside of our user page, we've gone ahead and we said, OK, we have the user store. So what can we do? We can do user store dot fetch users. So that should do the trick. User.userList equals await user store dot user stores fetch users. Great. So now if we come here and refresh, you'll see that everything. You'll see now that when we come over and refresh, everything is working still. Now, there's also value in case that you're like, oh, well, I don't want to have to manually fetch it. I want to just, like, whenever this is called, go ahead and update this. So an alternative model, there's no right or wrong. It just depends on what your use case is. If we go inside of our user page, rather than having to call user list and assign it, what we could do, theoretically, is we just want to call user store.fetch users. That's all we want to do. But if we do that, nothing's going to happen. Why? Because currently, inside of our function, all we're doing is actually running the, not that one, user store. Great. You see here, we're only returning the response. We're actually not doing much with it. So what we need to do instead is we need to refer to the user list. And so unlike the getters, which gets the state in an arrow function, because the actions really do require the entire context of the app, this is where the this context comes back into play. So that we can go this.userList equals response. And so now once we refresh that, you'll see everything appears as we expect. And this is now, again, it's tightly coupled, but at the same time, this might be OK in this particular instance because this is the global store. So that's actually probably what we want to do. When we fetch users, we want the entire global state to update. So basically, I would say if you're writing or composing your functionality in this way, I think it does make sense to tightly couple. In the event that fetch users has nothing to do with this, and that's for whatever reason it's a separate type of functionality, that's where it might make sense as just a composable that you import into your store that does something entirely separate that then you can better break up and compose your code. All right. Does anyone have any questions over the solution that I just gave? Okay. I think that was everything. Yep. Git commit feature add pinya to Sela view. Okay. Oh, wait. That was the wrong branch. Thank goodness for Git. Never mind. Git check out 16 solution. Now we commit it correctly. There we go. Now we're on the right page. Okay, git push origin. And so we'll make sure all the branches are up at the end of this. But, okay. So we're at the tail end of all this. Obviously, there's a lot more to cover, as there's an entire world and ecosystem out there. So some of the questions that have come up during this include things like, what about things like design systems, component libraries? Well, you're just in luck because recently Vuetify, which is the official library for doing Vue components with material design, that has actually been released. So if you go to Vuetify.js, I want to say it's .org. Nope. Vuetify. Oh, .com. I messed up. This is, I think, the most popular component library that the Vue ecosystem has when it comes to a really well-maintained team that helps to make sure everything's kept up to date. As you can see here, they have wonderful documentation that if you come in here, you can actually take a look at the different components. So earlier I was showing someone the tables down here. So you could take a look at something like a simple data table that automatically takes in data. It looks beautiful. You can sort it without doing any additional work. This is the kind of thing that you might want to check out if you don't have time to build your own design library and that kind of thing. So Vuetify, highly recommended checking that out. But the other library I just want to do a quick show and tell demo on is, if you haven't heard of this, this library, VueUse, is a phenomenal library. Because what it is a bunch of wrappers around, it is a bunch of wrappers around basically browser APIs. So things that you might commonly want to do, say, I don't know, you want to be able to do something with a clipboard. This should look familiar. It says, oh, this is a use clipboard function that we can import. And when you import it, it'll actually basically copy over whatever it is as like a V model and whatnot, and it just works. And so to show you, just as a sort of show and tell on this, something that we often want to do when it comes to apps is use local storage. And if you've never done that from scratch, it's a pretty good API to use, but there is a bit to do as far as like manually configuring that in addition to managing reactive state. So here, there's something called use storage. And use storage will do exactly what you think it will, which is it'll connect your reactive data with your local storage. So to show you what I mean, let's see that in action real quick. So I'm going to come in here, and we're going to go ahead and install the install Vue core. And then we're going to do this, we'll just do that as part of the solution so that you all can see this. So inside of Sela V, since we were doing that earlier, no, let's do this inside of Playground. Inside of Playground, we're going to go ahead and we're going to install VueUse core. And then inside of the Playground, we're going to take a look at the count store. OK, so when we look at the count store, what do we have to do? We have to start over at 0 every single time. So npm run dev. OK, see here. Boom. Oh, it's on 74 now. Boom. OK. What if we could actually store that so that when the user spends the time to increment it, it will actually then stay put? So the way this would work, believe it or not, is on your, let's see, this is the counter store, the count store. All you have to do is we need to import use storage from VueUse core. I believe this is how the syntax is. And then what we do is we say use store, oh wait, not the increment amount, use storage, wrap it around this value, and we pass it in two things. We pass it the name, so we'll call it count, and the initial value that it's going to be. And what this is going to do for us, VueUse core, did it not like that? Playground, import, whoop. Hang on a sec. We have marked the path. Oh, I did the @ symbol. that was my mistake. That should be better now. Count store, yes. Did you just break? It did not like that. One sec while we check this real quick. Install use core. Yeah, at view use core. Oh, this is so fascinating. I think this is breaking because of an alias issue. Okay, I think we're good.
Do you want to take like a technical break?
Or
do you want to just debug?
No, I think I should be able to figure this out.
Yeah.
I'm just going to do this real quick. We're going to change this and just switch that over real quick. Okay, and then with that new one, we can then take a look at all of our at components. At do. Okay, refresh. Oh, of course, it's yelling at me everywhere. Playground source. That goes there. That goes there. Okay. And then where's the at stores? Inside a base counter. Great. I'm going to go here and replace this. Okay, now we're starting to get closer. Okay. So now we have the count store. Now we can do this. Now we can, sadness. All right, maybe this was, all right, we might have to scratch this demo right now because clearly something is breaking. So what I'll do is we'll cut backwards towards when I was talking about this. And then for you all, I'll show you basically what's happening. Okay, let me go back to the storage piece here. So one of the useful functionalities of this is that it makes it really easy to connect the two. And so if we look at the Pinia docs actually for local storage, there actually is a whole page dedicated to it because it's something that is basically being used. So if we look at local storage, you can see that down here, yep, permit stores at local storage. Oh, plugins, they move the docs. Frustrating. Okay, sorry about that. So let me start the recording from here. So one of my favorite functions is the use storage here with Pinia. So if we look at Pinia use storage with view use, you can see that, view use. Okay, here we go. This is a blog post that actually shows how it would work. So basically, if I scroll down here, you'll notice that inside of this to-do list, you have this one line right here that allows you to import from use storage. And what it does is basically creates that local storage key. And then every time it's being updated, when Pinia loads, it will know with view use's help to check the local storage first to see if there's new data. If there's already existing data, it'll actually start from the local storage and not from this initialized value. And so what you end up getting is this really elegant coming together of your view use functionality with your reactive data inside of your view app. And so other ones that are really fun that you might want to check out as well is the color preference, like color mode. And so what you see here is that what this is doing is that it's basically a reactive property that allows you to easily toggle the state of the theme of your app. And then all this, there's so much stuff in here because basically what they've done is taken a bunch of browser APIs and made it really easy to integrate inside of your Vue app. So definitely highly recommended as one to check out. The other final thing that I want to shout out is regarding transitions in Vue. So as we know, creating good user experiences, that's a really important part of making things easier for users to follow. And so we don't have time to go into detail on this, but basically there are built-in components called transition and transition group that help you manage how things are being attached as they exit. So the most common example that I'll show right now, because you can check out the docs, but the one that I love to show is the one for transition group, because this is the one that I think we do a lot. So if I go down into transition group, a lot of us render lists. Rather than have them blink in like this, you can also have them move in a way that's even smoother. So you can see here, this actually allows you to shuffle stuff. And all that is being done, how? It's being done by wrapping basically your component inside of this transition group. And there's a little bit of CSS that happens there, but I'll leave you to check out the docs to get inspiration from that. But just know that this is built into the library so that if you want to try playing around with it, making the users easier to like track things, this is also where the keys are very important. Because as you can see, when we're doing things like shuffling here, Vue needs to be able to know which element it is, where it needs to go as it's moving stuff around. So this is another bit that, if you all are developing for your apps, definitely check out the transition group and transition for ways to enhance your user experience. OK, with that, I think the final thing we want to end on is deploying your app. So we're going to take a couple minutes to take a look at that. So when it comes to deploying your app, if you do it the standard way, you usually have to do like an FTP server, and you got to build this thing, right? Because after all, if we take a look at our C'est La Vie app, this is not something that we can just drop on a server and it would just work. We need to actually build the thing. So the way this works, if you take a look at your package.json inside of C'est La Vie, you'll see that there's actually a build command that we can run. So let's go ahead and do that, shall we? So inside of here, we go to C'est La Vie and npm run build. And right now there's a bunch of stuff in there, so let me clean that up real quick. Dun, 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 dun. OK, npm run build. There we go. OK, and what that will build for you is a dist folder, which stands for basically to distributed folder. And inside of here, now this should look like something you can actually deploy, where you have your index.html. You can see that there's generated hashes for your different assets for CSS, JavaScript, managing those things. And you might notice that, look, those chunks that we did when we did the routes, here they are. They're already parsed out for us because the bundler already did that for us. Now, of course, deploying this can be done a number of ways, but I'll just be showing you how to do this in sort of a Git-based format rather than just dropping it on the server. And so all this will take, so this is, I guess, shout out for the company I work for, Netlify. So if you have a free account, this will work fairly easily. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and log into my account. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a new site. And so the reason this is really nice is because what you're doing here is you're creating a pipeline that connects your GitHub repo that you're basically committing all your code to your deployments. So basically, similar to the way you want it to watch for reactive things in Vue to do things, this will watch your repo, and when you make changes to it, it'll then run new deployments. And so here, if we go complete intro, that should show up. Once we give it a little bit. There we go, complete intro to Vue 3. And then we have a branch to deploy. And so since my C'est La Vie really does need to be 16, so I'm going to be deploying the 16 solution branch, but normally you'll be deploying your main branch. And then the base directory is, for me, going to be C'est La Vie because we have multiple apps running inside of the project right now. So that's the specific one I want to build. And then we're going to run the command npm run build. And the directory, though, we have to remember is what's actually being outputted. It's a dist directory. And so that's what's being configured. And so once we run that, we get something that's pretty great. So for anyone who's used to do things in the old days where you did FTP servers, you had to manage a lot of caching, right? If you uploaded a CSS file, you had to manage like, oh, is the user going to get the right thing? Like, are they looking at the same version? And so oftentimes when you're debugging things, it's hard to figure out what's going on because what your user's seeing might not be what you're seeing. And so in the effort of like having Git deployments, basically, one of the things that Netlify does for you, and there are other companies that do this as well, so this is not the only one, is that you'll see here that it automatically generated for me a random URL that I could share with people. And so you can see here that all my functionality is in here, actually. So if I can continue with emails, it's live, which is great. That happened in a matter of seconds. And then the other thing, too, is that with the domain settings, it's pretty easy for us to then say, let's go ahead and swap this out. And I'm going to call this C'est La Vie. Granted, this is whoever gets to it first. But now that I've swapped it out, we can see now that when I open it up, there we go, saillaview.netlify.app, and it just works. And the beautiful part about this is not so much that it deploys, because again, there are many ways to deploy. It's the fact that it'll watch your GitHub repository. So in other words, if you go inside of the app.vue right now for C'est La Vie, and then instead at the very top, we'll say something, let's see, from here, we'll say, this is a new message. And then I think I did a triple S on that. Let me fix that. And then if we commit this to our branch, so C'est La Vie here, And then ignore this stuff for now. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Git commit feature add new message. And then I push on this branch. One of the things you'll see is that in the deploy, it'll actually, basically, there's a hook to watch GitHub repo. And it knows, hey, it's time to make another build. And so you can see here, it's going off, it's running, it's building the thing. That's fine. And so what's really cool about this, though, is that when it's running this build, it's basically doing an atomic deploy. So what that means is that it's completely separate from the previous deploy. Because that was a problem with a lot of enterprise systems, is that once you push a deploy, you weren't sure what the assets were. And so especially if you're having users with issues, it was hard to debug. And then let alone rollbacks. Like, it was kind of a nightmare to deal with all of that. And so, OK, our site is live. So we can see now, if I go over to over here, you can see, hey, look, this is a new message. It's right here. But again, in the effort of the atomic deploy model, what if your product manager is like, whoa, 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 we don't want this message. That is a bug. Well, typically, what you'd have to do is you have to get your engineers. You have to be like, hurry up. We got to figure out what's going on. And you got to push the right code, right? But no, what you can do because of the atomic deploy is we can come in here. And we can actually just say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and inside of here, we can publish this deploy instead. Whoop, not this one. There you go. Click Publish Deploy. And we publish it. And what you'll see now is that it's switched now from the latest commit. And what we have here, when we go back to our URL, voila. Everything's fixed. And so this is a kind of this is basically, I would say, the modern way when it comes to thinking of deployment, in that, especially because we use a lot of Git versioning, why shouldn't our deploys also be versioned in a way that allows us to go ahead and, whether it's split testing or ensure that we deliver the same things to our users, this is just something that I wanted to show you all and how you can deploy your app with Vue. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about deploying your app? Cool beans. All right. Well, to wrap things up, closing thoughts. So as I mentioned, there's a lot in the ecosystem out there waiting for you. Going past Vue, when you start looking at things like server-side rendering, or you want a sort of a higher meta framework that provides more built-in things, highly recommend checking out Nux 3. That should be coming close to stable soon. But we have a Nux 3 Foundations workshop that I actually gave recently. So if you check that out, that'll also walk you through how Nux 3 works. And with your new Vue 3 knowledge, you'll be able to pair those things pretty well. In addition, whether it's TypeScript as well, TypeScript, be sure to check those things out, because with Vue 3, TypeScript is much easier, especially for those using the Composition API. And so other than that, I would say, I think that about wraps it up from my end. So a big thanks to everyone on the team here from Front End Masters for hosting this. But for those online, if you have any questions, I'm online in the community under the moniker Ben Codezen. So there's my info there. So if you ever want to reach out, have any questions, don't hesitate to do so.
Any final questions?
Any final questions from the audience?
All right. Well, thanks, Ben.
Great. Thanks.